In Dungeons & Dragons, one of the most common ways of figuring out how to create an enemy encounter is to look at the level of your players and then compare that to the CR of the monster you're going to be throwing them up against, and just picking either a medium challenge where the CR is the same as their level, or if you want a harder challenge, you give them a higher CR. But here's the thing, I don't think that's how we should select our monsters. CR is a great estimation as to what types of monsters players in their level range should be fighting, but I would argue that at the end of the day, max HP and damage output are far more important, and you should absolutely be homebrewing the shit out of your monsters. So allow me to show you what I mean. Let's start at a very low level, level 1, just to get my concept across, and then we'll go into more detail as we go on. Anyone who plays Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition is probably very familiar with this D&D Beyond webpage. Now let's say in the story, orcs have captured the Baron's daughter, the players need to go out, fight the orcs, and rescue the Baron's daughter, and then they get prize money. Right? Let's say that that's the concept. So you look and you're like, well, they're all level 1. They're going to be going up against orcs. Let me see what this website has for orcs, right? And you go, well, an ordinary orc is only CR 1/2, that's hardly a threat, that's not really a boss monster. You go, well, technically a band of orcs would have an orc war chief, that could be interesting, having a handful of orcs and then a war chief, and then you look over and you're like, oh shit, challenge rating 4 for the war chief? Oof, probably gonna die. And then you go look over an Orc Claw of Luthic, and you're like, well, that's CR2, is that gonna be too much? You're focusing a lot on the CR and what the game is already providing you, and you should really be looking at these more of templates than strict mathematical formulas, right? So let's go ahead and deconstruct this entirely, not by what's actually available in the monster list, because that's boring. Go instead to your players' character sheets. When you want to create a combat encounter, don't look at the monster list, look at your players. So let's say you have 3 party members. You've got a barbarian, a rogue, and a sorcerer, right? That's a pretty normal party composition. So as the dungeon master, you know that your rogue has sneak attack. So he's probably going to try and hide and then do a sneak attack so he can get that extra 1d6 damage, right? And you know that the sorcerer is likely going to be a ranged character, and you also know that they're probably going to be in the back firing off firebolts. But for our purposes, what that means, because they've probably got firebolt, that means that they could be shooting from 120 feet away, which means if you're going up against orcs and all of your orcs are melee character, they're basically never going to be attacked. So the fact that they might have a low HP pool usually doesn't matter. So we're not even going to worry about their armor class or their HP for right now. Instead, we're going to look at the front line fighter, right? The barbarian is going to have the most HP, the highest armor class, so you're going to want to build your orc war chief around your barbarian. So what we're going to do is we're going to completely ignore this stat block over here, all these monster stat blocks, and we're going to create our own orc. So we're going to select the orc as a race, and let's say for the sake of simplicity, the orc war chief is going to be an orc fighter. That's going to give them proficiency in all the armor and weapons you could want, allowing this character to be very flexible in terms of what it can and can't do. So first things first, you know that you have an orc in your party, so you're probably going to want to give it athletics in case there's any contested athletics checks. You're probably going to want to give it proficiency in perception because you know you've got a rogue and you don't want this character to be effortlessly dunked on by the rogue over and over again. And we're going to make him a melee fighter. So let's say great weapon fighting. And what great weapon fighting is going to allow you to do is if he rolls a 1 or a 2, he can re-roll that. And that's super convenient, and that's going to make him seem artificially more intimidating. And let's give them the barbarian treatment. Just max out everything, right? Strength, dexterity, constitution. And let's say you don't really care about their inventory, so let's just say they've got a great axe. They're a tribal warrior, so they're probably wearing hide or leather armor. And just so the players can get a reward for killing him, let's give him some Eye Agate, which is worth 10 gold pieces, and just give him that so the players have a monetary reward for killing them. It's just some random gemstone he has in their possession. Alright, so now let's take this character sheet and let's start ripping it to shreds and rebuilding it to fit our players. So first things first, Even though the barbarian has maxed out dexterity, maxed out constitution, they're a huge threat, they still only have 15 HP. And if you take a look at the Orc Chief's Great Axe, the Great Axe does 1d12 plus 3 damage, which is actually not good, because what this means is they could potentially one-shot the barbarian, and let me tell you, that's gonna be lame. Your barbarian is gonna be so annoyed if he comes up charging, the Orc Chief comes up at first in initiative, and before he can even swing or defend himself or do anything, the Orc War Chief one-shots him. That is gonna be lame. This is gonna be a very short combat encounter, and it's not gonna be a ton of fun, right? So instead of going for the most effective weapon that this monster could potentially get, we're actually going to delete the Great Axe. I know Great Axes are thematically a very orcish weapon, but it's too strong. There's a potential to one-shot the character. So let's actually swap that out for a longsword. That allows us to keep their strength at the same level as the barbarian, making them feel strong. They're still maintaining that +5 to hit, which has a just under 50-50 shot of hitting the barbarian with their 16 armor class, which is something we would lose if we lowered their strength. All we're doing is making sure that with their two-handed longsword, they're doing no more than 13 damage in a single attack, and they're not gonna one-shot the barbarian. Now, second problem, you'll notice that the Orc Chief only has 13 HP, whereas the barbarian, they did opt into the Great Axe and they can do 15 damage in a single hit, meaning this is gonna be way too short of a fight. So what are we gonna do? We are going to change their HP based on the maximum possible damage of all of your players +1. What this means is this boss monster is gonna be able to tank hits for minimum 2 rounds. Right? It's never going to be the case where they're gonna get wiped out in a single round. The barbarian can output 15 damage max, right? The rogue with their rapier can put out 11 damage max with their rapier, but with their sneak attack, they're adding 1d6. And the sorcerer with their firebolt is outputting a maximum of 10 damage with that firebolt. So with 15, 17, and 10 damage as a max output, that equals 42, which means that your Orc Chief should have 43 HP, guaranteeing they survive the first round. So we're gonna override their max HP with 43. And here's why this construction method is going to work out the best. In combat, your barbarian, rogue, and sorcerer are all going to attack it with their strongest attacks first, and no matter what, this Orc War Chief is going to survive that first round, right? He's then going to attack the barbarian and not kill him. And now, because the Orc has a 13 armor class and every single one of your players has a +5 to hit, that means they're going to be landing their hits greater than 50% of the time, whereas his longsword with this +5 is actually lower than the barbarian's 16 armor class, meaning he's going to be hitting less often. There's a good chance that instead he's going to miss at least one attack. That gives the party 2 rounds to kill him, assuming all attacks hit and do average damage. But even though it's probably only going to take 2 rounds for the party to damage down the Orc Chief, because his 2 hit is less than the barbarian's armor class, it's probably going to take him at least 3, if not 4 rounds to damage down the barbarian, because there's a very high chance of multiple attacks missing. Now, if you think that that's not particularly scary and you want him to hit more than 50% of the time, all you gotta do is increase his strength. Just by adding 1 point to their strength score, that's going to boost their 2-hit bonus to +6, giving them a 50% chance to hit, and it's also going to boost their longsword from 1d10 +3 to 1d10 +4. That 14 max damage, still not enough to one-shot the barbarian, but just makes him ever so slightly more deadly. Also, let's not forget, we have great weapon fighting. And because 1s and 2s for damage get re-rolled, he's basically guaranteed to roll at least a 3, and that 3 dice roll +4 means he's outputting consistently at least 7 damage. So it genuinely is only going to take 2 or 3 successful attacks to damage down the barbarian. It's just a matter of how many of those attacks hit, and that's all RNG. Now, throughout this combat encounter, we're assuming that the orc is only fighting the barbarian. But let's say you feel like it's not very interesting for only the barbarian to be taking damage, right? Now, another thing making your orc a fighter does is it gives you access to second wind, meaning if after a round or two he's almost dead and the party has taken effectively no damage and you want this battle to go on for longer, you can choose in the moment whether or not you want to take advantage of the fighter's second wind. Orcs typically don't have second wind, but because he's a fighter, you have the option to give it to him if you want to make this last just 1 round longer. You want some of the other players to take some damage too. Well, there's absolutely a way to do that. So if you want to make your orc chief a threat to both the barbarian and the rogue without actually increasing their total combat effectiveness, we're going to swap out the longsword for a short sword, bringing that 1d10 plus 3 to a 1d6 plus 3, so we're reducing their max damage against the barbarian, but we're going to use 2-weapon fighting, which allows them to, when making an attack with a light one-handed weapon, also make an attack with the second light melee weapon. So when the barbarian and the rogue come up and the barbarian makes his attack, the rogue makes his attack, exposing him from stealth, your orc is now going to attack for 1d6 plus 3 to the barbarian and then take his dagger and attack for 1d4 plus 3 against the rogue. And you'll notice 1d4 plus 3, the max damage on that is going to be 7. How much HP does the rogue have? 9. So crucially, we're not going to one-shot the rogue. It's going to take 2 shots. Now, technically, because we've lowered the maximum damage that our orc war chief does, they're actually less likely to 2-shot the barbarian. You've actually made them less effective, but made them feel more threatening because now they're not just engaging your barbarian, they're also engaging your rogue. Now, let's say after being attacked once with the dagger, they take the full 7 damage, they're almost dead, so the rogue decides, I'm going to take the disengage action and move away so that I can't be hit, and instead of just standing there and stabbing, I'm going to throw daggers from a distance because I don't want to die. You now have the option of taking your dagger and throwing the dagger at the rogue. And because you can draw and use a weapon in the same turn, drawing a weapon is a free action, if you want, you can give your orc war chief just like a bandolier of daggers so that they can keep hucking daggers at the rogue. Now, because this probably isn't going to last more than 3 rounds, there isn't much more we need to do or much more we need to take into consideration here. And that's the benefit of having low-level encounters, is there's just so little that you need to take account of. It's very easy to make balanced and engaging boss encounters. Now, I feel like that's a good overview for how to balance low-level encounters, but things definitely get a lot more complex at higher levels, so I'm going to make a separate part 2 video on how to balance encounters at higher levels. So subscribe, stick around, that video is coming out shortly. Let me know what you thought of this video in the comments down below. Bye, guys.